So, yeah, along with centralisation in the 60s, big rooms were built in Australia. That's where the initiative was. Nostrand, New York, where the leader was, stayed small, relatively so. And then that moved on to jumbo jets and all sorts for Australia. Of course, that's all been twisted since by Bruce Hales to make it sound as though the Hales' introduction of big things was all fine and the jumbo jet was all fine. I'm afraid that, like so many things, the truth does not reign. Facts are twisted. And then, you know, there was matters like the Bicester matter, which was a complete, when you actually look into it, Jim Taylor didn't have any answers for those that were genuinely raising the issues. So of course it was all smothered over and people found themselves out of fellowship. Mr. Wells was one concerned, and he left and burnt his ministry. He was so shocked at the way the leader, Jim Taylor, was handling the matter. That needs looking into, as do many. The whole thing went wrong in 59-60, the whole system, and it needs thorough review by capable brethren inside, and they need to have to do with brethren that left in the late 60s and 70, so that all sides of the story can be looked at and fair, balanced judgment arrived at. And the Lord will, I'm sure, bring blessing as a result of that. There was an incident in 1962 where Mr. Nightingale's wife came into the Barnet room, absolutely incensed at the way her husband had been treated, because they'd had to separate because of the new separation rule. Inside brethren was saying that actually she's right. They've been told not to live together. She was in distress. Of course she was. That's why she came. The brethren accepted that. But the rule that was introduced, I believe, by the Haleses through Taylor, had to be complied with. I understand in Southampton in 62 that Jim Taylor wanted to relax the rule, but the Haleses kept him to the sword and said, you can't back off now. And this is the way they operate. It's a ruthless business principles. They need to repent and change rather than enforce something. Now, look at it now, it's a monstrosity. Look at the way they've treated my father and me and myriads of others. It's distressing, it's heartbreaking. And we need understanding leaders, people that understand the distress they're causing, the sorrow, the heartbreak, the suicides, the sadness, dislocation. It really does need addressing. I feel feeble in my words, but God knows what I mean. So, I would now like to read out one of 10 letters that Hubert Calvi of Southport wrote to Jim Taylor Jr. in 1965, all entitled Righteousness and Truth and Responsibility. Mr. Calvi had the whole issue clear in his mind, and he had the guts to write to Jim Taylor. And he says, Jim Taylor, in his prefatory note, says, Jim Taylor was informed of the intention to publish the letters. No reply has been received, not to one of them. So he wrote 10 times. I think I've written to Bruce Hales getting on for 10 times. I've not had a reply to one. So the same thing prevails now. Bruce Hales has got enough money to employ 1,000 secretaries, but he will not reply to my letters. Why? Because they catch him out. And these letters from Mr. Calvi caught Jim Taylor out big time. And I've actually sent them via Duncan Hallbert to the brethren in Preston for them to consider, because Southport is the nearest meeting to Preston. And these letters need to be considered in all gravity. He says, these letters are written and the volume published as the outcome of my own deep and prayerful exercises in a spirit of utter dependence on the Lord, but with a conviction clear as noonday that the time is overdue, 1 Samuel 17, 26 and 48, for a blow to be struck for the truth in the might of the Lord's strength, for the overthrow of strongholds and every high thing that lifts itself up against the knowledge of God, so that the brethren all may be helped to see all things clearly and follow Jesus in the way. Mark 8 and 10, glorifying God. Further to these volumes, I should be glad to receive from any part of the world precise, established facts and authenticated information, preferably with dates, names and places, which would be suitable to be used with due discretion in the interests of the truth. What a beautiful introduction to his beautifully well-worded letters of conviction to JT Jr., who was busy drinking in chill-out parlours and withdrawing from the houses in the commercial system at this time. So he was pressurised and chose to ignore these letters. That doesn't mean they should be ignored by the brethren. I mean, the last one is entitled, it's broken into sections. 1, the wrecking of homes and families. 2, addiction to alcoholic liquor. 3, natural relations. 4, your attitude to those withdrawn from. 5, your attitude to other Christians. 6, other matters. And, you know, I could read the whole thing out, but these letters have been given to Duncan Hallbert to pass on to the Preston brethren. I think they should consider them all and then report to the Bible and Gospel Trust trustees, so that these can be looked at. I mean, just under the addiction to alcoholic liquor, Calvi says, a disquieting development in all the sad story of the spread of heresy was that since about 1960, it has been insisted that all in fellowship should be encouraged to drink alcohol liquor habitually, that it is not sufficient that they should be conscious of their liberty, but they are expected to express it and normally to have alcoholic drink on their tables, even though children be present. All have been called upon to conform, and issues have been raised with any who were reluctant. So he raises the question, does this spring from love of the truth? The exercise that the brethren should be more like Christ? Or was there some, however unconsciously or otherwise, hidden thought that if all the brethren became liquor addicts, any fleshly weaknesses or self-indulgence or drinking habits of the leaders would be less conspicuous? Good question. Piety is the basis of spirituality. Drink caused the initial failure of Noah in his uniquely distinctive covenant relationship with God after the flood. He quotes CAC, great man in the history, ridiculed by Henry McGackey and others. There is no rule about drinking, but the godliest were never drunk. That's what CAC said. And Paul was concerned that it should not be brought under the power of anything which, though lawful, did not profit. And so he goes over and reasons that a total abstainer would be a more balanced man than an inebriate, and the holy things of God will be safer in his hands, or her hands. In Yorkshire a few months ago, a young exercised brother and his wife felt it imperative to sever their links with such a fellowship because of the dangers to which their 3 young children were exposed, and so on. It is well known that there is a real danger of some of the Lord's Day evening foregatherings on social lines developing into drinking bouts on the plea of mutual liberty. And then he goes over natural relationships, and arguing that a person in fellowship cannot ignore the claims of nature. If he does, he thereby becomes unrighteous. If natural relationships have become dislocated, it is the fruit of sin. Your teachings and enforced practices have aggravated the dislocation. The Holy Scriptures, Ephesians 6:2, honour thy father and thy mother. Is Bruce Hales encouraging my sons today to honour me? And I don't demand it. Just natural, just normal, that's what good people do. They honour their parents, look after them, care for them. Don't cast them off when they get old. He goes on to say, I suppose the fact that fathers' hearts are alienated from their children would indicate apostasy. Natural affection has been disregarded. I think a great point with God in the recovery is to bring about recovery of the household. It is a primary thought with God, the household, to have parental and filial affections, conjugal affection. All these things need to be regulated. They have become entirely deranged. And then he goes under the heading attitudes for those withdrawn from. He just argues that many true believers have been withdrawn from and have been compelled to leave what is now your sect out of love for the Lord Jesus Christ in incorruption and for the truth. Or otherwise they've been withdrawn from by the exclusivists unrighteously for intelligently doing the will of God. And so on. Very, very well laid out, utterly ignored by the hierarchy of the day in the PBCC. He goes on to say, you speak of expecting those under discipline to be restored. What a hope you cherish, he says sarcastically. What pride in your speaking of them all as under discipline. Thousands will echo my words as I say, I shall never return to you. You must return to me. We have come out of separating the precious from the vile. Jeremiah 15 verse 9. So godly men have had to leave because they're so repulsed by what's going on in enforcing this destroying doctrine. The sneers and insults of your adherents are reserved for the lovers of Christ. So you're sneering and mocking and despising genuine lovers of Christ. It's very serious, Mr. Hales, Garth Christie, and the John Rich, and the hierarchy around the world, John Anderson. Used to be Andy Smith in New Zealand, I don't know whether it still is. But come on, Don Druckenmiller, James III, you've both taken meetings and had them printed with Bruce Hales in attendance. So you are well up there. It's time, Mr. JT3, with the greatest of respect, and you came and stayed at our house in 1971 with Jim Symington, that you start telling the truth about your father. And that will bring in times of, soul searching, but that's good. And it'll help the 55,000 brethren to find Christ. That is really your duty. You're very responsible, James III, as having misled the brethren over Aberdeen. You went to the house to rescue, apparently rescue, that's what we're told, the father from evil men, I'm sorry, he brought it on himself, and that truth needs to be respected. And I speak to you, James III, with utter respect. You've asked me to take meetings in New York, which I've done to the best of my ability in more recent times, around about 2013, 14, I think it was. And I really enjoyed being with the brethren. And I think we had a free time. Mr. Patterson, Davey, got me going in Westfield. He said the young people loved my ministry. Well, I'm not against anybody. I just want the truth to prevail rather than Taylors or Haleses or Simonton or any of these leaders of the recovery, ministers of the recovery, these men who are meant to be holding the level of the truth as ministered by Paul the Apostle, but are liars, sorry, and deceivers. And Calvin goes on, devout Christians are habitually insulted and disparaged by the exclusivists, who feel that they are the people, making nothing of all the rest of men. Luke 18, 9-10. Oh, it's so full, and yes, they are long. There's 160 something, 169 pages, 170 pages of letters with an index at the end, which is very helpful, and covering subjects such as excommunication and heresy, assembly, eating, exclusivism, righteousness, sin, sinlessness. Be interesting, just I don't know what it's about, page 6, but nobody is sinless apart from Christ. So if there's any talk about anyone being sinless, I don't understand it. Can't be right. And I'm not sure. I'm just looking this. Can't just see where he mentions it. But he does speak. Perfectly confused understanding of the truth is evident, and what a distorted perspective manifested in the remarks in ministry that seeing that God has abandoned Jesus, why should a wife not be prepared to abandon her husband? Oh, in volume 34, the remark was made at reading at Dorking, at which you were not present, that the test of jealousy brings out what is out of proportion. Oh, he covers, if we can face Hubert Calvey of face up to the thrust of Calvey's letters from Southampton, from Southport. I'm actually going to Southport next week to the funeral of Mrs. Earl de Castris. They were friends with my parents, and I'm comforted that my parents did find friendship after they left the brethren. Godly friendship, true friendship, amongst others who've been cast out of your system ruthlessly. Mark and Helen Storey would be another couple. Many more down at Haywards Heath. Phil and Rachel Broadbridge, and Morrises and others. So, although my father felt it keenly and had an early death because he was so heartbroken at the way he'd been treated, I believe, there was some comfort along the way, and I'll be eternally grateful for those kind brethren who got above their own situation to reach out to my parents and provide a little bit of solace in their grief.